Welcome to the Altered Attitudes podcast, brought to you by East Coast Recovery, an online addiction treatment centre based in the east of England. This episode is sponsored by Rehabs UK, a definitive place to go to find rehabilitation services and advice. So today we're joined by Jakana Rita. Thank you for joining us today, Jakana. And of course we've got Lester with us as well, Managing Director of ECR and Rehabs UK. Thank you, Lester. All right, so we want to talk a little bit with you, Jakana, about your story today. Obviously, you're an addiction expert, and just to tell the audience a little bit about what you do for ECR and why you're here today. You are our new head therapist, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit of background, Jakana, like where you come from, what led you to be a therapist in addiction?
Yeah, I mean, he's addiction expert in more ways than one. So, I made it my business to know about drugs and what they did growing up, because that for me was my solution to life. I found connecting to life quite difficult. I never really knew what it was about or the reasons why. And then when I found substances, I thought I'd come across this miracle solution to me. It was kind of anti-Jakana medication.
What sort of age was that?
I think about 12 12 years old when I kind of remember having this kind of thinking that this is what I want to do all the time. Isn't it great? Right, okay, so all I've got to do is just keep doing this and I'll be okay.
Was that drugs or alcohol?
That was drugs then, yeah, and mainly weed at that point. But yeah, in the end it didn't have to, it didn't really matter what substance it was, as long as it was something that changed how I felt. And so yes, I made it my business to become an expert on what drugs done.
Sorry, just wanted to sort of qualify that for people that might not know. That was your childhood particularly disturbing?
I don't think it. That's not the feeling I had. Disturbing, it isn't different, dysfunctional, maybe. There was lots of love in the home. My parents were kind of hippies. They used substances. It was part of their life, and it was just part of what I knew. But yeah, quite dysfunctional when I reflect back. If I was to tell the average Joe some of the stuff, they would probably reel back in horror. But I didn't get that feeling that that's what my family was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you weren't sort of walking around at 12 thinking, oh, I'm disturbed and I need some relief. It was just you tried drugs and
no, just happened.
Had an amazing effect on you.
Yeah, and that's what, I never really, there was always a discontented type feeling that I didn't understand because I had nothing to compare it to. And I only know that now that I've got a program of recovery, put the drugs down and become who I am today, comfortable in my skin. I only know that now on reflection, comparing it to what it is today.
Okay, so from 12 till what happened after that? I guess there was a good period. There's usually a good period of drug taking, and
it was. There was a period of time when it was fun, absolutely. Mm-hmm. It was the usual going clubbing and out with friends, and when it was, and that's what it was. It was just about fun. It wasn't about anything else then. But I recognised that I kind of wanted to feel like that all the time.
There's a bit of a thing you ask people, you sort of say to them, why did you start taking drugs? And a lot of time people reply, because of this, because of some problem. But I say I don't think that's true. Like I think you're just saying there that people started taking drugs because other people around you were doing it. You're introduced to it, whether it's alcohol or smoking, and then you try it, and then you think, oh,
Absolutely.
that feels very nice to me.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important point to build on, that understanding that most people don't take drugs because of the problem. They usually take drugs because that's what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have the thinking to think, well, this is what's going to fix how I'm feeling inside.
Yeah, I've got a
At
low
that
self-esteem,
age.
so
I've
I
got
need some marijuana.
It's not. Do you know what I mean? Because A, I don't even know what the marijuana is going to do.
Or
B,
lo-
I don't even understand myself and what that's
don't know
about
what low
yet.
self-esteem is.
No. Yeah, exactly. But when you try it, you do recognise that. Yeah, actually, it kind of makes me feel a bit more comfortable in my own skin, and that just comes about as a result of.
Did you have any siblings? Or do you have any siblings?
Brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's similar age?
He's 6 years older.
6 years older, yeah. Did he go down a sort of similar path? Because you said your parents were kind of hippies and they sort of...
Yeah, I mean, we call it a casualty of the 90s. It was that era where, you go out clubbing and it was kind of about ecstasy and that's kind of what young people were doing at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wonder, because it's always interesting to hear stories of people and their environments and what they were brought up in, and then to kind of still man it and think, is there somebody else that was brought up in that same environment that maybe went down a different path? Because it kind of, it's just always quite interesting to see how you can be raised one way, and this kind of goes into the topic we want to talk a little bit about today, which is sort of the link between like trauma and addiction, or really just environment and addiction, and whether or not the environment is indicative of the addiction or vice versa, or maybe there's not too much to it, which is why I kind of asked about your brother there, and you don't have to share too much about it, but yeah, I was just interested to know whether you think it was the environment that you guys were brought up in at home, or as you say, casualty of the 90s. Is it more just the environment of the world at the time and those sorts of people that you were hanging out with?
Well, I mean, you could look back at the environment I was in, because my parents smoked weed and they'd done all that, and someone might think, oh well, that's why you do it. But the truth is, I've worked with so many people in my career, and a good percentage of them haven't had anything like that in their environment whatsoever. They've had respectively quite normal upbringings with hardworking parents who have encouraged them to do the right thing, and which most people do, but that doesn't have a bearing on whether they turn out like that. So if it was about the environment, then why didn't they do what they were brought up to do? But there seems to be something else that happens.
Yeah, because even you get like people that it's more complicated than that, because there's so many different dynamics to it about the environment, and then different things to consider, because you may have you do get people where the whole family can become that way, but then you get more often than not where not everybody becomes, and again we're talking about drug addiction, chemical addiction, that not everybody in a family will become a drug addict, even though they were brought up in the same environment. And some people may have different ways of dealing with addiction, like a workaholic, for example, which workaholics in the early stages, they look quite successful people, but they're just dealing with their trauma or difficulties or their addiction in a different way, which makes them on the surface look more successful. And I think that's one of the problems with addiction. It is kind of like a hidden enemy. Until I think you have a reasonable understanding of it, then it's very difficult to treat it, because it is hidden under so many different things like dysfunction. I've realised that if people have addiction, but then they also come from a dysfunctional family. That's like two separate massive problems, and the dysfunction is more difficult to deal with than the addiction, because it's even more of a hidden problem that people have, because most people around them are dysfunctional. It's hard to even tell they're dysfunctional a lot of the time until you actually start talking to them and know what dysfunction actually, how it sort of plays out in people's lives. So that's not a really good rule of thumb. A lot of people can use drugs and alcohol just heavily, and doesn't make them an addict in my mind. There's a big difference. Might be how to get to, but
yeah, absolutely.
So that progressed for you into pretty heavy drug use.
It did. It did in the end. The thing about me, one of my character traits is curiosity. I was adventurous. So I'd want to try anything new, and so I wanted to try everything, and I did. And you don't know it's a problem. You'll never know it's a problem really until it's too late, because you know when it's a problem when it becomes one.
You're already in it, kind of.
Absolutely, yeah. Because as you say,
And
there
in
are
addiction, there's not an opportunity to leave once you've done it.
no.
That's your choice gone. The only time you've got a choice is that first time you do it, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course you think, well, at that time you're able to choose. You have more choice, so you choose. Oh, well, I'm going to carry on. It's only when you realise that you don't. It's very hard to get back.
It's too late then.
Yeah.
And so, from the age of 12 so I guess you've gone through all the horrors of sort of drug addiction. So what sort of age was that when you sort of come to that realisation and you were able to begin your treatment journey? What was the first sort of treatment that you went into, and when did you start trying to change?
So I wanted to change long before I went into treatment, which wasn't until I was like early 30s. But I didn't know how. I knew I had a problem, but I didn't know what the solution was. And I had to. I had to go through an awful lot to get to that point, to want to do that. So by that time I'd lost an awful lot, and we talk about choice. And, I could not choose not to use or drink.
This was heroin by then.
Heroin by then, and then intravenous, then and alcohol as well, because I never thought alcohol was a problem, and I remember someone saying to me, "I'm worried about you with your drinking." This was before it was ever outwardly a visible problem. But when I reflect back, I look at my relationship and the thinking and the attachment I had to alcohol. I'd get excited about going to the pub to drink the alcohol, never mind the friends that I'm meeting. It was about the alcohol. That's what I was getting excited about, and I had that for as long as I can remember. And I speak to people that don't suffer with this illness, and they look at me and they're like, "So you didn't go down there? That wasn't at the forefront of your mind? That wasn't the kind of the main thing?" And they're like, "No, we went there to see our friends." And that's the difference between someone without addiction and myself. It's like long before there is a psychological, emotional attachment to the substance, way before it ever presents as a visible problem, even to the person themselves. And you only see this stuff when you look back. But yeah, so at 33, I think I was, I'd lost my child because I couldn't choose not to. use, you know, even though I was desperate and in tears because I didn't want to. And I went into East Coast Recovery at that point. And it went from there, really. The whole, you know, something changed in me. It was remarkable. And, you know, since then, I've been able to achieve or become the person who I was supposed to become.
Had you tried any other forms of recovery before coming to East Coast Recovery? Even if it's just yourself, not necessarily asking for help, but...
Well, the local... I was with the local drug and alcohol centre for many years, I think probably 13 years at least.
So methadone script.
Yeah, and they, you know, they'd give you. There was a period of time where they'd offer counselling. Methadone script. You know, all sorts of stuff really.
Do you think there's any reasons in particular why that didn't work? Because obviously you came to East Coast Recovery and you said something changed in you, but you had made efforts before and people had tried to help, but it clearly didn't do the job. Do you think there's anything you could maybe pinpoint that could have been improved back then? Not from your point of view, but from the people that were trying to help you. Is there anything they could have done?
I'm not sure there's anything they could actually do with what they had at their disposal. I don't think any of that would have helped, because something a lot deeper had to change in me. So I'd know all this stuff. I'd have all the knowledge. That they'd teach me stuff, but they didn't have. I knew it already. I had the knowledge that, I should cut down. It does this to your body. It does that. Maybe if you put other things in your life, like got a hobby, it would be better for you. And you could. All this stuff sounds great on the surface, but I wasn't able to do that. Because my addiction was too powerful.
Do you think
it was
there
all
was
about
people
that.
around you that was working for?
Not of, I don't know. I mean, I don't know anyone who got clean and sober from who I knew, my side of the streets. I have seen or met a couple of people that hadn't gone far down that road, and it wasn't as progressed, the addiction, if it was, that was able to kind of do that at that point. But no, I didn't know. I haven't known anybody, and actually one of the people who worked there said to me, "You're the only person I know that's managed to turn it around."
Wow.
And this was, I'd obviously seen this lady who worked there for 14 years.
We used to get that a lot at East Coast from local authorities to say that there's something different to what you're doing than what we're seeing even from other rehabs, that people are coming back, there's something tangibly different about them. What is it you're doing, sort of thing.
Yeah. And it was it's spiritual. It's the only way I can describe it. Something that happens, like a connection, like something happens in the community of the people that were there and the people that were helping, that kind of just changed the perspective and gave me hope. And it's nothing like, you got to do this and this and this and get a hobby. It's none of those things. It was purely a connection and being able to be reflective about me and be honest about me and see the truth of that, because it was, you know, I couldn't see me for who I was back then, and it was everyone else's fault. And the way I viewed the world, I was very much isolated in my own skull, if you like, sitting with the problem, and I needed to get out of that problem, which was an internal problem, and you know, it kind of addressed that, and that was just the starting point.
Yeah, see, I very much put in a nutshell, I think addiction is a closed mind. So it's that, you know, they call it an obsession. So your mind becomes very obsessed, and you can't get out of that obsession. You're sort of stuck in a very small channel, and I think good recovery rectifies that. So addiction is a closed mind, so good recovery is how do you open that mind again? And I think that's kind of what we learn at ECR, how you could reopen that person's mind, which empowers them, and they generally find their own way then.
Yeah.
But it's that to me, that has to happen. That mind has to get re-fired up, reopened again, because it can fall back into the obsession. So it's knowing if it closes again, how do I open it up? So we used to even do talks on about your brain closing and what it's like when it's closed, and then how do you get it open, and then how do you develop it so it can keep opening. And I like it. It's, if you brain scan people, their brains go dark, and even when they're taking drugs, you know, most people are saying, well, it was open in my mind. So even as a child, your mind was under a lot of stress. It was closed. It wasn't very open. And then, so when you take drugs, it opens your mind a bit, and then you think, oh, that's a nice. It actually has an effect on your body.
Yeah.
You feel that effect
It
on
does.
your body.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Because yeah, and that's kind of how it felt. You kind of almost felt human.
Yeah.
More than you did before, and so it really fits, doesn't it? You know, the problem is eventually it kind of closes your mind even further.
Yeah, because people
and then
think
it
you're
doesn't
taking
work.
away your freedom, but you didn't really have any up to that point. It's actually
No.
setting you free. Because
Yeah.
when your brain starts opening, then you can start
Absolutely.
directing and focusing, and you become more self-determined.
And you know, from what I know about addiction, with you know that where part of the brain it's centered, and we want to use a different part of the brain, and that, you know, we want to harness that, and that is spiritual principles are around the part of the brain you want to open and grow, and so it makes sense that to practice that and strengthen those pathways brings about that change.
So you started to touch a little bit there on how you can start to open the mind again. Leslie said that really in a nutshell addiction is that closed mind, and Jakana kind of agreed with that. I wondered if there's, as a therapist now, what are some of the ways that you use that perhaps you learned, you know, with Lester back in the day that seem to resonate with people, ways in which you can kind of get across that message of how best for them to open their mind.
Sorry, Ben, I don't want to jump over you there, but just because I just sort of come in my mind, because it's that little captured in their interest. So it's like you've come into treatment and now you've got an open mind. It's kind of what happened after that. What did you do with it? What led you to sort of be a therapist?
Well, it's a funny story, because I had no thoughts for that to happen. You know, all I really wanted is to live a life free from what I was doing, drugs and alcohol. But I did go to volunteer at a local, well, not volunteer, they called it Recovery Champion, and then I wanted to volunteer, and they wouldn't let me volunteer. But I think that, you know, I think my ideas were different, and I expressed my ideas, and I probably shouldn't have.
I think as well, because again, I want to do a podcast on this, just focused on you know, what comes after recovery. Because again, it's like, even though your brain's kind of beginning to open, you've still become a drug addict. You still become a person that you didn't necessarily choose to be. And to change yourself, it's not an overnight matter. It's quite a process in it that you find yourself, you sort of become conscious of who you are, and it's like, but this isn't who I want to be. But you can't just change automatically. It's a bit of a journey to come after that.
For me it is a journey, because there's a lot of things that are kind of quite automatic. But there were parts that were or felt overnight. Like I was very much the victim and full of self-pity and angry at authorities and what they've done to me. And it was quite a remarkable, quick change, actually, how that went. As soon as I was able to see myself for the truth of what was the truth, not mine at the time, that kind of stuff, went away. Elements of it in other areas can come back, of course I'll have parts of self that will always be there, but all in all it's a process, but quick in some areas, very quick.
Yeah, because you're still very much managing a sort of a mental condition that doesn't kind of go away, that brain wants to close all the time.
Oh, yeah.
When you've got issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm lucky because I can notice now and feel when that's happening. Every now and again, if I can only see my own stuff, but thank God I have the opportunity to know what to do when I am in that, and then I can often see it from a different angle.
So you sort of have got to develop a good recovery program and people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I need other people around me with, like-minded people who get it, who understand, who can recognise something in me before I do, and tell me, Jack, you're full of it today, what's going on? Because I won't be able to see that. And I need those, we need those people in our lives to be able to do that for us. And that, and I call them people in my corner that are going to tell you the truth, not cheerleaders that tell you what you want to hear, that can cheerlead you to your grave. I would much rather someone telling me how it is, even if it pisses me off. I'd rather that if it's going to help me in the long run.
And so then kind of like, you didn't get what led you then to being a therapist?
Yeah, so when I went to do this, I wanted to do volunteering. They wouldn't let me, and of course, I thought, well, hang on a minute, I'm qualified enough. How dare you, kind of, because of all what I've learned and everything. My mistake was I tried to go into somewhere that had been doing it a certain way for many, many years, and tried to tell them how it's done. And
standard.
it doesn't.
They don't like it.
No, I don't go down too well. And and who am I to kind of do that? I'm like 7 months in, walking in.
The neurons are firing. They get carried away, don't they?
So they said no, and I'm a very stubborn person. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to got a waitressing job or whatever. And then I thought, right, I'm going to go and get myself overqualified, just to show them. That was in my thoughts, but then I forgot about that. But then something else happened where something come up where someone said, "Oh, there's a counselling course." It was long forgotten, and I thought, I've got to start doing something with my life. And it kind of just happened, and it was a lower level counselling course, and I had no intention of going through the next one, and then the diploma, and then all that. no intention of that either, but it kind of just seemed to happen, really. You know, it's almost like something else was deciding for me. You know, that was not my set path, but that's the path that's been laid out.
I guess you must have liked what you were learning as well.
Yeah, I did. I find the human mind fascinating. You know, with the subconscious and what you learn in therapy with, you know, the Freudian stuff. You can kind of very much relate it to the ego, the superego, and Carl Jung. You can, you know, it can really fit with, you know, the mindset that addicts kind of speak about, and the argument they have going in their head and the defence mechanism and all that stuff. I've always found that interesting.
And but also kept that sort of specialist as addiction. Mainly that was your forefront of your.
Yeah.
You stayed in that field.
Yeah. And I wanted to help others know that there's a way out and it's possible, and have what I have, and not suffer.
Yeah. So how would you say your career's gone then? Because addiction treatment is still quite new in lots of ways in this country, I think, and there is very big divides of different theories and beliefs and ways of doing it.
Yeah, where there's loads, isn't there? You know, we're always trying to work it out. But I don't, you know, there's not really one, there's no clear answer for me.
No.
You know, what it is, it's a human condition, really, with an added something else on top.
Yeah.
You know, for us.
And so I think we were just hoping to have a little look at sort of the idea of like trauma. It seems to be becoming more popular of a reason for addiction. So we're sort of wondering what's your sort of personal, maybe and professional views on that? Your discoveries?
Well, you know, I used to think that it was, oh, you know, it's because of this and it's because of that and it's because I went through that. But, you know, as we were talking earlier, that, you know, that wasn't why I first started using. It became the reason as I started to continue to use and then would do things that I wasn't proud of. So it became more the excuse as to why I was the way I was. It kind of made it excusable. Because it didn't start that way. You know, it didn't start that way. And I think it's a natural defence mechanism to find the reason or the justification, and it's natural to kind of want to know why you are, or why you do what you do, or why you've become what you've become. But, you know, in working with people over the years, you know, it's clear to me there's no defined link between trauma and addiction.
It's funny because again, I think most people though, I guess it almost, for me, it's like a bit of a stereotype that most people would presume you've become a drug addict because of some childhood trauma.
Yeah.
But most people, if you stopped them and they say why are you a drug addict, they would probably tell you some childhood trauma. On the news, when they interview the homeless people, it's always some childhood trauma or some adult trauma, but they always put that forward as the reason for their addiction.
Yeah, and it's quite often the reason they think that's the reason for their addiction, because that's how they make sense of who they are.
Yeah, because I used to do this group, I think I've talked about it on other podcasts, but we'd say to people, you know, why are you a drug addict? Why are you an alcoholic? And again, most people would say, you know, got molested, parents left home, got bullied, you know, sexuality, every reason that seems like a problem reason. But then I say, well, hang on a minute, is that why you started drinking and taking drugs? And they're kind of like, well, no, like kind of like your story. They sort of said, you know, it was friends or family or somebody give me a drink or a drug, and it. But it did have a noticeable effect. That something in me really attached to that. So that would show that there's something sort of present in the person. Now, I think you already said that. But then you do find people that say, look, I haven't got any noticeable trauma. I don't know why I am the way that I am. Because a lot of time people will say, you know, I've got this problem. They're like, well, they never had that problem. And they're the same as you. They never had that problem. And again, because a lot of people have trauma and dysfunction in their lives.
Yeah. I hear that all the time. I've got no excuse to be to do what I do, and they almost, you know, the people that haven't had any trauma, who, you know, are addicts or alcoholics, you know, I almost feel even more guilty because they don't have that defence to explain that for them. So yeah, that I hear that a lot. I don't know why I am the way I am.
Yeah, and then you get where families is like, not everybody becomes an alcoholic and addict, even though they've had the same. And I've met people that have really been traumatized in their life that didn't become alcoholic or addicts, or noticeably that dysfunctional in any way. So there must, I always think there must be something else present before any of that in certain people.
I believe so. I mean, when I speak to, you know, when I've done groups and I've spoken to like a room of 20 people that relate to the story of when they're 13. Well, I got in pubs when I was 13, I don't know about now, but when they're going to the pub with their mates, having that thinking of in the forefront of their mind as I get to go and have a drink, you know, all of them recognise that attachment.
Yeah, there's something different. I like this guy Clancy he used to listen to when I was in the early recovery. He said this. He said that he tells this story where he was he owned a marketing company, and then he lost everything, ended up on the streets and got his teeth kicked in and all that sort of thing, and he lost the company. But then he ended up working back for the company. They give him a little job because he was you know, they felt a bit sorry for him making tea and all that, so he was making tea and coffee at one of their meetings, and he said they were doing this advertising for this vodka called Ramshackle vodka, and he said he was there, he's making the tea and coffee, and these marketing experts are doing this marketing meeting trying to think of a good way of marketing this vodka, and it come into his head, Ramshackle vodka goes boom. And he thought, that's a brilliant slogan. So he interrupted the meeting of the executives and said, I've got a brilliant idea about the vodka. And Ramshackle vodka goes boom. And they all just sort of glared at him and told him to shut up. And that if he carried on interrupting their meeting, they wouldn't let him make the tea or coffee anymore and fire him. Anyway, he went all sad and hurt and phoned up his sponsor and said, oh, they're really rude to me today. I just had a good idea. And he said, well, what did you say? And he said, well, they had this vodka. And I said, Ramshackle vodka goes boom. And the guy said, you don't get it, do you? He said, what? He said, you're an alcoholic. He says, for you, Ramshackle vodka goes boom. He said, for them, Ramshackle vodka goes boom. See, it doesn't have the same effect on everybody. If it did, they'd all be alcoholics.
See, we get that. I mean, I thought, that's good, that's quite cool, that. But, I didn't...
But I think, but again, it's just trying to put, for me, and I guess it's the same with yourself, isn't it? You're just trying to get to that point of addiction, where it begins, what causes it. So for me personally, to say that trauma causes it just don't quite work.
It doesn't fit exactly. There's not enough of a correlation to say that that's the cause. I think trauma don't can make it harder, because can make it harder to kind of.
Well, I could accept trauma, but it would, to a degree, but it would have to be. It's like, again, I use that analogy like I said earlier about the peanut allergy. That, if some people have a peanut allergy, when but they'd never know till they have the peanut, which is similar to us.
Yeah.
That we never knew that we had a problem really until we took the peanut, took the alcohol.
Yeah.
And then something different happened to us that didn't happen to even our siblings that went through the same trauma. So there was something else present in us, I believe.
Yeah.
Before that, because again, it just doesn't. Everyone's been traumatized, but not everybody becomes an alcoholic or an addict.
I think trauma could possibly speed up the progression in areas.
Yeah, because I think the trauma is, if the brain's not functioning correctly, life's pretty traumatic anyway. I still find that.
Yeah.
I still find that what I called addiction is more the mental condition. Again, I don't believe it's a spiritual problem overall, but just keeping it sort of on the psychological level, that I still struggle psychologically with life and with problems to an extreme, to a traumatic extreme.
Yeah.
I still can be traumatized over the stupidest thing.
Yeah.
But I don't believe it's the trauma doing it, because my wife often looks at me, who's having exactly the same experience, and says, "What is wrong with you?" I tell this story and it was a great revelation years ago. Again, I was just having a bad day. My head was going, my brain was closing, and I was reading through this contract. And that was frustrating the hell out of me. It's not my favourite thing to do. There was a deadline, I'd kind of left it to the last minute. And then she sat down next to me with a bowl of cornflakes. While I'm trying, all I can hear is this crunching. And I said, "Please, you're getting on my nerves." And she's Jamaican, so she's like, "Chow, you get on your own nerves." And I thought, that was so good. That was a real revelation. It's true, I get on my own nerves.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's that thought process, which I would say is evident in all people with addiction of this kind. I don't think everybody is. I think not everybody's an addict of this kind.
Yeah.
But if you are, all of them other treatments probably are not going to work for you. So they might be good treatments for other problems, but they're not going to treat this problem. And I think the alcoholic and addict of this kind, which is why you got that treatment, your experience was your mind opened up at least sufficiently enough to start building a life and managing that problem. Because would you say that problem's, apart from the fact that you don't take drugs, but would you say that mental condition is completely gone?
No.
It's something that
it'd be nice.
It would be nice.
It's a hell of a lot less than it.
But even that, if you took a drug now or had a drink, do you think you'd feel better in the short term? I mean, I know your life would go to shit, but certain things I think, that would feel nice. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that even though we're still to a degree suffering from that condition, because I know if I took a drink or a drug now, I'd really become more relaxed than in the initial moment. That ramshack of vodka would still go boom for me, which is why I can't drink it. Because it would still get so I could still see that even though I'm living with that condition through a recovery program, I'm living at it with a higher level of relief that I don't need to take drugs to relieve myself of this mental condition. Would you say that's a similar for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, I don't feel compelled to have to do that. like I did. At all. I mean, now it might be other things. It might be like, chocolate, or if I'm tired, and just double spoon of coffee, and that might make me feel better. So I'm tired, but yeah, no. And
but that would be considered, I guess, most regular folk would.
Yeah, I think most people
going for a walk,
that.
having a sport, having a hobby. I mean, a lot of it's trying to get just a natural relief from life, isn't it, and relaxing. Do you someone that finds it easy to relax?
Yeah. I love relaxing. Do you know what I mean? It almost to the point of. Do you know what I mean? It's. My partner's the opposite, and it does his head in, and he does my head in, because he runs around like a chicken, and I just want to sit and relax and put my feet up. But yeah, I see what you're saying with the, that would, you would get that relief still.
Yeah.
But I don't feel as though I have to have a relief from anything.
Because you're getting relief from
just, other things, how the programme for me, it's ongoing relief, and I know when that starts to reverse, and I know what to do if it's when I'm feeling like that, and what works to remedy it.
Did you think there's different kinds of people? Because I think that's kind of what muddies the water is that even like in AA, it's like I've really had to understand this program, the 12-step program. I've really had to have help from other people. Like really, it's like I could become traumatised so quickly and over responded in some areas. It's like I think they even notice, like people like us, is that when there is a real life drama like COVID and things like that, or if war breaks out, we actually feel a bit better. It's like the normal life stuff is difficult.
It's like, oh, just that? Oh, yeah, that's all right.
Relationships, that'd be all right. And like things like relationships can be very traumatic and very difficult because again, it's the signs of a not necessarily very well functioning brain, and that if your brain's not functioning well or you can't cope, we say like I can't cope, it's usually a sign, to my point of view, that you're underdeveloped in certain areas. And again, I think that's where the dysfunction and all that stuff can kind of cloud the water, that not everybody with addiction is dysfunctional or come from dysfunctional families. I do, and I see that's a whole another area where I have to work hard to improve my mental state and my coping mechanisms. And things can become, the simplest things can feel so problematic that the ego sort of solution is to try and avoid it rather than start facing it and developing pathways and working through it until it's not a big issue anymore. Like you can see, like I can be, feel like my life, because I always end up living in a big life. It's like, how does this even happen to me? It's like I consider myself a bit of a nut. Yeah, I always end up in this massive experience where I own all these properties, I've got all these people working for me, I've got all these conditions, I'm involved in all of this stuff, and it's like, how does this keep happening to me? And it's like, well, obviously I'm doing it to myself, but I'm not always aware of that. And then every now and then it just feels completely crushing and unorganised and unmanageable. And then I feel myself wanting to escape. I want to just escape from it. But then I come back to that place. It's like, no, you've got to go, and it's like having a messy room. You forget.
Yeah, there's a lot of life to manage, isn't it?
Yeah, but the solution is go tidy the room up.
Yeah.
Or if you don't need the room, then get rid of the room. But mostly it is addressing things and developing. So during the break there, we was just sort of talking about, the idea that, it's, people often think this is who they are. And so that kind of then infers that they can't change, not who you've become. And I think even listening to your own sort of story, if you sort of, this very much is a, when you come into somewhere like ECR, because again, I believed in enlightenment and I believed in empowering people, that we use the program and then beliefs to try and empower people.
Absolutely, it's a thing with the trauma as well. Do you know what I mean? You know, that's being your story. You know, becomes the identity and the reason, and puts a person in a position of more powerlessness, because they can't help who they've become, or they can't help any of this because it's being governed by something else, or it's being governed by a trauma. And that's all the thinking mind. And as we were talking about, identifying with the thinking mind and believing that that is us, when it doesn't have to be. You know, it's quite limiting.
Yeah.
And if you're able to observe the thinking mind, you can get truth, perspective, you can even change that, and then your experience of life can change, because you know, your experience of life will be affected by how you perceive it directly. How you perceive life will be how you experience not just life, but a lot of things.
And your perception is kind of made up from your experience.
Yeah.
See, I like this idea that, you know, if you have like 3 buckets, you have on the left you have a red hot bucket of water, on your right you have a freezing cold, ice cold bucket of water, and in the middle is like a room temperature bucket, which represents the reality. But then if you got this arm in the cold bucket and that arm in the hot bucket, and then pull them out and put them in the lukewarm bucket, well, this arm's going to think that reality's hot, this is going to think that reality's cold, but the reality was it's lukewarm. So perception is very much what environment you've been brought in. I think that's a very important part to understand before you can start really making some meaningful changes in your life. That's not who you are. That's just who you've become. And I think that becomes an exciting discovery then, that you get to go on this discovery journey if you're willing to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to make your world how you want it.
Yeah.
In here. Do you know what I mean? Trauma or not.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it?
What was it you were saying? I forgot the way you were putting it just as the last break about trauma. The way you was talking about it.
Can't remember.
About the process, I think, of how it works through your mind.
What with the attachment with the story?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we in order to understand life, we use past experiences to understand the present moment, or to try and judge what's come in. And you know, that's a survival thing as well. So, but we'll make sense of life and what is happening based on past experiences, as you said, Matt. So our perception of what it actually is based on something that was back then, and it doesn't mean it's true. So we have this story about us and who we are, and we look for the evidence to support that in our environment.
So I always see that. I never did any therapy courses or anything like that. I did NLP courses. I quite like that because it's the neural linguistic programming, the language that you speak to yourself, which I think is very important, because again, one of the things I've noticed, I've become a lot more eloquent and my tone has changed, and I'll be careful because I'm a very angry person. I have to listen to my tone so I can know if my tone's changing, I'm losing it, and it's one of the markers that I've kind of built in to try and keep myself in a better emotional state. But so I realise even like I've become listening to myself talking, as I've become more educated and got more understanding, the whole language in my mind has become very different, that I'm listening to somebody who can give me a lot better information, a lot better guidance. I still need other people, because when my emotions get hurt, the voices change, and it's that alcoholic drug addict voice starts, that angry person starts appearing in my mind, and if I don't get on top of it, it usually starts taking over it. In the AA book, it talks about a jackal and hide. Well, I don't think that's ever completely gone away. I just think I've learned to keep, maybe decide I choose to be who I want to be more. And so I've learned to develop, I've learned to I think the way that I've kind of see it is like that when you actually, like what you're saying, I think this is what you're saying, is that in a way we all just take our intellect takes a photograph of life, and then we start relating to that photograph, because pretty much everything that we're doing is in the past, because we go from moment to moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but one thing you could see in mind, whatever you're looking at now, like I'm sort of looking across at a kitchen, but I might not notice the kitchen there even while I'm talking to you if I'm focused on you, because my mind cuts that out, what's not relevant to me, what's not got my attention. But then you have this other thing, it's kind of like, if you buy a white van, then all of a sudden you see them everywhere, but you never see them before. So you probably see your car a lot more than I do, because it's in your consciousness, you're aware of that car. So for most other people, they're just not conscious of that car. They're not there's so much we're not conscious of, because it has no day-to-day relevance to us unless somebody points that out. So essentially, it's like our brain takes a photograph of reality, then we sort of cut bits out that we can't see. We probably even cut bits out we don't like, and then we stick bits in
that we want to see.
That we want to see.
Or that we
and then we
understand.
start pushing the buttons and wonder why it ain't working.
Yeah.
Why isn't this working? And then you go and tell that version of reality to someone else, and they may say, well, did you consider this? And you add that into the mix. And that's kind of why I like this idea that, when you've got a mind that's kind of completely built on ego and defences and survival, which I think most people in addiction have, whether they had that before or it become that way because of the addiction.
So was that what I was saying? So we create more trauma as we go along in our addiction.
I think you keep re-traumaing, which is a strange thing, isn't it? That people actually recreate the very thing they're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
It's like, I was abused by my dad, so then you sort of hang around abusive males, or I was abused by my mum because she was very controlling, and then you go and find yourself a controlling spouse.
Yeah.
And you'd think you'd do the opposite, but you tend to be attracted to.
And that's where trauma seems very relevant. Do you know what I mean? That happens with addiction or no addiction. Trauma to me is separate from the addiction, but it's good to deal with it concurrent. If it's affecting you today, but the addiction has its own solution, and one isn't dependent on the other. When you address the addiction, though, you're far more likely to be able to go back and start to address any trauma that affect your life.
Because you stop
in general.
Because you'll stop responding to it and then acting on it, and
exactly.
And then that should change your experience. Because, again, this is why I like in things like the Bible, it says we walk by faith, not by sight. The sight means sort of carnal, our senses, our five senses. It says whatever your flesh, whatever your carnal nature is, you have to stop responding to it. It even says sin, all sin, it talks in them terms, sin being sort of separate from God. All sin is carnal. It's in the physical realm, but not all carnality is sin. So it's saying that, acting on these lower impulses is separating you from this higher mind. So when it says we walk by faith, I say to people, they go, I've got faith. And I'm like, well, in what? So it's saying, well, faith in these principles, like the idea of Christ being the teacher, that he's saying, look, these are principles that you should live by. These commandments that you should live by. It's not good to kill, steal, sleep with your neighbour's wife, covet their stuff, lie, cheat, it's just not good for human relationships to live in these ways. It causes separation. And so it's saying if you start resisting to respond to your natural impulses and start living by these principles, and some of them are pretty hard. It's like, look, if someone slaps you in one cheek, offer them the other. It's like, don't even retaliate in that anger. I'm not great at that. You slap me in the face, I'm not going to take it. But I apologise later. But I understand the principle, because it's saying, look, if that person's hitting you, it's because they don't feel loved, and you hitting them back is not going to, it's only going to add to that human condition. If you can love them, or at least not attack them back, then it may help them. They may not have been through a loving process. They may not be able to do a loving process. I realise that in my life I struggled with loving processes because I'd never had an opportunity. I was responding from dysfunction all the time, and anger and fear and low self-worth and inadequacies, because I was quite inadequate when it comes to relationships, because I didn't know how to respond. I was just too aggressive and controlling, but even the controlling was just trying to get the other person to help me manage my emotional state. And so you end up in all these difficult relationships. But then when I started to say, look, there's these principles that are higher than yourself, the power greater than yourself. Now, if you try and practice these principles, no matter what you think and no matter what you feel, so the step 3 is we hand our will, which is our thinking, and our life, which is our actions, over to this care of this God as you understanding, this higher power. So he thinks, well, I want to punch you in the face. That's how I feel. But this higher power is saying, I need to explain to you why I want to punch you in the face. Apologise for what I've did wrong, or whatever the spirit ritual principle is. If I practice that, then what I realised is as my intellect started to change and come more in line with that, the photographs started changing. And even my childhood, because it's like everyone's got like a childhood photo album. And again, like we were saying earlier, a lot of people would always pick out the bad things. Oh, it's because of this, because of that. And this isn't, again, for everybody, because some people had horrific childhoods. And even though I had a very difficult one, there was a lot of wonderful stuff happened in it. And I started to notice that. So when people say you can't change the past, it was like the photographs of the past changed for me, because I started seeing other things that I wasn't looking at. My focus wasn't on the things in my past. So as my intellect started to change, felt that I was starting to get more in line with the reality, and that when I started pushing the buttons, it started to work better for me. That my life works better for me.
You can see the whole picture, not just the tiny bits you want.
Yeah, and also I've got other people that I can also ask their point of view, because they can see things that I can't.
Yeah.
And I could never do that before. There was no way I could ask what you thought or ask for your advice, because I wouldn't want you to know that I didn't know, because that made me feel too vulnerable. Plus my whole identity was wrapped up in being right.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was sourcing my identity, because I felt so wrong all the time.
Yeah. Another defence mechanism.
It's just constant. Just a whole life built on defence mechanisms.
Yeah.
It's hard to...
And, defence mechanisms are, it hides the truth. And that's what it does. It pushes down reality, suppresses reality.
Yeah.
And so you see what you want to see.
But it is difficult to get people to start looking at that stuff. Do you find that as a therapist?
Yes, that can be... Yeah, it can be very difficult. To get to that place of openness, to be willing, to want to do that. Sometimes sometimes people don't want to.
It's just too traumatic for them to...
But where they don't, there's a part of they probably don't know that they don't want to, but there's a part of them that doesn't want to let that go.
For what reason would you say?
It'd be something or an aspect about themselves that would be unacceptable to them, So they've pushed it down and they've developed this identity and this idea, and that's become their reality, and they're not willing to consider
That's who they
budging
are,
from
or that's
that.
who they've become.
Yeah, and that's they're I think people have to get to a certain place before they're willing to kind of change that to that degree. Almost like, with my addiction, what happened to me, I was beaten into a state of reasonableness.
Yeah, that's
before
the good
I
thing
let
about
go.
addiction, isn't it? Yeah.
Before I let go, and I was able and willing to let go of all those defences. But the truth is, you can't make anyone want to do that. They have to want to do that.
I do think that, again, I'm probably a little bit sort of conservative in my views. Well, definitely not a little bit, a lot. But I do think that when society understands interventions better, that I think good rounded interventions will actually help people get to that place a lot quicker than... It's always really bothered me is working in addiction treatment, that when somebody flops out of rehab or recovery, and then we sort of say, oh, they're not ready yet. I just don't like that.
There are mechanisms to reach that certain, to reach a certain point in them, to speak to that part of them.
Yeah.
If we can find that, like, things close to heart, like family, like, that can.
Yeah,
it takes things like that.
You said yourself, it was consequences that brought you to that place.
Yeah.
But you think in your own experience, how many when was you having consequences bad enough to bring you to that place if everybody else wasn't absorbing them? Good intervention, I think, is saying, look, that person, they don't really need to spend another 10 years in their addiction to build up enough consequences to stop. I believe most people have enough consequences after 5 years in addiction. But it would good intervention would be gathering them consequences and bringing them consequences to them instead of everyone absorbing them. And so in my experience, again, it's not a complete science with everybody, but I've seen it work enough that when them interventions are done in the correct way and them consequences are gathered and brought to the person, it usually raises the bottom.
Putting it in there is bringing it to their awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
To the with
because they're in denial up until that point. But again, people help them be in denial because they're not getting to see.
Yeah.
It's only when you reach that rock bottom place is that you can't deny it anymore.
Yeah.
Because I think, like you were saying there, that they can't accept something about themselves, and there's an unfortunate sort of truth for that case is that there is a principle that you cannot change what you don't accept. And so if you don't accept yourself, then you're not going to change. And that's been the most difficult thing for me to accept, is myself. I'm not an easy person to accept for a lot of other people, but for myself, it's been difficult. At the end of the day, I realise, look, if I'm the only person on this earth that accepts me, it's going to take that. So I don't sort of just use that as a way of badly behaved to allow myself to be badly behaved. So that's just the way that I am. But if you don't accept, which again is a good thing about the 12-step fellowship, that it helps you build a mechanism which allows you to discover the faults in yourself, and honestly evaluate them. So that you can then decide, is this who I want to be? And if the answer's no, then how do I create a process to allow myself to change? Because, again, we said early on, it's not easy changing, is it? Some of that stuff.
No, and I think it helps as well, with the having a community. The community bringing more, a lot of people kind of showing the person the same thing. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Becomes less undeniable.
Well, I think that becomes sort of the God of our understanding at the beginning for most people, because it's like it only says a power greater than yourself.
Yeah.
And usually a group of people is usually can be a power greater than you're just looking at yourself, because it says self-centered and self-seeking. It's like the ego self is the root of your problem. Until you can accept yourself and that ego and how it operates and works in you, then it's very difficult for you to develop beyond that quite a childish state
absolutely.
of being, where you're being governed by your emotions.
Yeah.
We sort of say that an alcoholic, an addict, is an adult that's lost or never had the ability to adjust and control their emotional states. When we can't do it inside, we tend to then reach out and try and control other people, places, things and situations to make ourselves feel better. And it says in that state we're then dominated by the world. We're not free. I don't have to do what my feelings tell me.
Or the fears.
No, and I can have quite extreme fears and feelings, but I still, because I believe in the principle, I'll try and put the principle above how I feel, and then act upon the principle rather than my...
So it's like, I talk to people about this idea of self-will and letting go and being in line with God's will, and people kind of have this idea that gives you
it's like God's thinking, whatever this God is, the spirit, isn't it? It's just that thinking. So if your thinking says attack, and that thinking says forgive or be patient or be tolerant,
and that's all it is. They think they're handing over something that they're giving over control, and they're going to have less control. But in reality, they're being controlled by fears. They don't have. They're not choosing to behave in certain ways sometimes because it's being governed by other drives. So they have less choice to choose how to act or behave, or what choice to make in certain situations.
So I think that myself. It's like, I think it's in the word, isn't it? And again, it's like, I think like we discovered language is important, and there's lots of misunderstanding. So, even some of the groups that we do say the word apple, some people think red apple, some people think green apple. I say, I'm talking about computers. So when you start talking about God and stuff like that, it brings up images in people's head, and it's like, well, that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. And again, I've been doing this myself for 30 years, and over them years, my perception of what that actually is has changed immeasurably. But in sort of more the basic term of it is, it's look, these spirit rituals, which are things, it's like, there's this part of us I believe is a spirit or an energy, whatever you want to call it. I like the brain scan show light, and it's like, look, whatever that light is, that's what I would call that's attached to the spirit of a human, because when that light leaves your body, you're what we call dead. You have zero function. So if you're an alcoholic...
So what is that? So what is that light?
Yeah, and if it goes dark because your brain's closing, and then you become unhappy, it's because you're getting closer to death, and you don't want to be near death. You want to live.
Yeah.
And so the more light you get in your brain, the more alive you're going to be, but the more function that you're going to have. You're going to be able to enjoy more of the experience of being alive, which again, when you're in addiction, you're denied, because you just keep repeating the same experience. In actual fact, it gets worse, it gets worse, it gets worse, it gets worse, it gets smaller, it gets smaller, it gets smaller. And again, like I say, you're living in that obsession. You're entering into that little funnel of life that you're living your life pretty much through inside a toilet tube. And so it's developing that spirit ritual. When you start understanding what them spirit rituals are, then what got me on the hook, I started to have a far greater experience. And so the 12-step program talks about, look, we did these spirit rituals and we had a spirit ritual experience.
Yeah.
Which is more in line with what you're missing in your life.
It's talking to a client who's practicing these principles and doing this stuff, and you know, she said to me she can connect to life. She feels so different about life, and I never thought that possible. You know, I thought life was flat, but it's in that's what's changed her, just her experience and her being in life.
Yeah, it's getting just a brain opening up. You get better,
exactly.
you get better
Absolutely.
chemicals. You get a better experience.
And I say to people, it's like this. You're lifting yourself up to a higher level of consciousness, a higher plane of conscious being. You know, you don't have to think of it like that. That from there, you know, you can go. But you know, that's the first thing.
Yeah, and it's there for everybody, but you just have to develop and let your brain open to connect with it. And I think, you know, for me, it's amazing, and I guess the same for you. That's what makes this all worthwhile. It's very difficult working with people with addiction. It's very difficult working in the field of addiction because of what goes on with governments and regulations and the whole trauma and dysfunction of it all, and the people that you're working with. But there's nothing better than watching somebody becoming conscious.
And it's about consciousness,
it's
you know,
about
because
you know, and then the experience they start to have. I love it. I get people send me pictures of fridges full of food and cars and holidays and children's parties.
But the speed at which it can happen, and people can be in psychotherapy for years and maybe get to the very reason or point or unconscious psychological of whatever of why, and you know, but it's really in the practicing these principles, and it just brings about that change. And you know,
so I think that's what recovery
quickly
really is, and I think you either have it or you don't, and I think not everybody understands it, and so there's lots of treatments, but they don't really open people's minds in this way. And again, even like people want to argue and say you're always not the only way and things like that, and it's like, well, I know that, but we have a way that works, and I've just seen it like even like yourself, that once you get that person's brain to start functioning properly, even covered in all of the craziness, once that spark happens,
anything's possible,
and they keep moving in that direction, all things are possible, and you start seeing these people really is like the dead walking and raising up and then marching on and having incredible lives and making a difference and having, you know, their families, their children have got a better chance. You know, they're getting a lot more wholesome environments to grow up in, and I think that's kind of what makes it all worthwhile. Well, I think that's kind of bring us to an end, but great to have you over, Jakana. We'll have you back again. We wanted to introduce you to everyone, that you started working with us on the online groups and things like that, and your one-to-ones, which is slowly developing, but want to do more of these and different subjects, but it's always nice to have somebody that's had the experience in them themselves, because I think it's kind of what we're always offering. I mean, you know, again, the quickest thing that I could always say to somebody when they come into rehab or come into treatment is to say, look, you're looking for a new life, and most people don't want to just carry on in that lifestyle, so it's kind of our job to help change people's lives. And I know the only way that I can change your life is to change your mind, and that means there's things that we need to show you, and once you get it for yourself and your brain fires up, then that's just an amazing moment. I can't imagine it's any different than watching a newborn baby. Just that first moment.
You see the light in the eye.
You just see them switch on.
You see there's something behind you, like it's like a light.
And they feel it, and they're like, oh, I just realised. And it is just like they've never been conscious all their life. My nan used to say this. She'd say, oh, you don't know you're born. And I thought, what does that mean? But I think I understand what that means now. That people just become conscious, and then they start building that consciousness. And I think that's the spirit side of what we're talking about. It's nothing
that's what I think
freaky, and it works, and it's wonderful. And then you think, man, this is what I've been missing all my life. No wonder I did drugs. So I probably would again if I lost that, because it's like I need to keep my mind open. Anyway, so I think that brings us to it. So
thank
you very much for coming over, and hopefully we can do some more as we go along, different subjects. Well, usually the same subject but different angles.
Yeah, thank you for joining
Brilliant.
us today, Jakana. Thank you, Lester. Everybody watching at home, I'll leave all of our relevant links in the show notes, and please do call us if you want to get in touch. Jakana, you run our family talk sessions, you run one-to-ones, you run online counselling as well, so anybody listening, if they want to get in touch, talk in more detail, details are down below.
Yeah, and we do a support group as well for the guys who are doing the online counselling as well, that they can join. Yeah, and we also do 10 sessions of kind of different subject each week, and
Yes,
that's around the
10-week courses that you run.
yeah.
If
And
anybody like
that's
to come on one of them,
around
they can speak to treatment advisors and they can arrange that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do get in touch. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.